So with that said, hello and welcome to our Gina Cody School Distinguished Alumni Speaker Series titled Driving Innovation with Applied AI. Our experienced and knowledgeable speakers will explore the role applied artificial intelligence plays in driving innovation and also finding solutions to important challenges. This event is part of Concordia's 30th homecoming festivities. Not only are we celebrating an important milestone anniversary, we're also presenting our very first fully virtual homecoming. So even though we can't be together in person, this past week has shown us what a great opportunity this is to have people join us from all over the world in all different time zones, which I think is really exciting and unique about this year's homecoming. My name is Nida Siddiqui, and I'm an alumni officer at Concordia. I have the pleasure of serving as your MC for the evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia's campuses are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Gunio-Gehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Now, for those of you on social media who would like to join the conversation, you can tag @concordia.alumni and use the hashtag #CUHomecoming. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science. With over 10,000 students, the Gina Cody School's enrollment has nearly doubled since 2009, making it one of the largest and fastest growing faculties of its kind in the country, which is really exciting. In last year's Maclean's rankings, our engineering program jumped 5 spots, which is the biggest move in the history of the rankings, to 8th place overall in Canada. Computer science ranked 9th overall in the same rankings, and this is out of nearly 100 universities nationwide. And we know that the best measure of a school's success is in the success of its alumni. And tonight's distinguished speaker is a really great example of that and an excellent ambassador for Concordia. We're thrilled to welcome Richard Howe as this evening's distinguished alumni speaker. Richard, or Rich as he prefers to be called, is an entrepreneur and technology executive who's currently the chairman and CEO of Inuvo, which is an AI technology innovator. Inuvo is a $65 million a year business that reimagines how information is captured and used to create online audiences for brands and agencies. Rich's business successes include building multi-million-dollar startups, reinventing technology businesses, and developing high-performing teams across 3 continents. We're pleased to have Richard with us to share his wealth of experience and knowledge. And he will be joined by Tristan Glatard, who is the Associate Professor in Concordia's Department of Computer Science and Software Engineering. Tristan will be moderating this evening. Tristan is the Canada Research Chair on Big Data Infrastructures for Neuroinformatics. He's also a member of Concordia's Perform Center and Data Science Research Center. His research focuses on building platforms for the efficient and reproducible processing of big data. But before turning things over to Tristan, I'm going to ask Emad Shihab to say a few words on Concordia's plans for a new Institute of Applied AI. Emad is the Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Studies, as well as an Associate Professor and Concordia Research Chair in the Department of Computer Science and Software Engineering. Emad is a highly talented and renowned researcher who is interested in mining software repositories, software quality assurance, empirical software engineering, mobile and wearable apps, and software architecture, just to name a few. So now I will turn it over to you, Emad.
Thank you very much, Nida. On behalf of the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science, I would like to welcome you all to our discussion on driving innovation and applied AI. I want to start by saying that it is very clear that artificial intelligence, or AI, has moved from the research lab and into our everyday lives. And Concordia and the Gina Cody School recognizes this, and we are allocating a major effort to facilitate the many applied AI initiatives that are being performed within the Gina Cody School, within Concordia University, and within our community as a whole. And this is done through the introduction of a soon to be born Applied AI Institute. I am very glad that we have one of the co-directors here who will be talking later, Tristan Glatard, in our panel. The Institute recognizes that real-world problems that need to be solved with applied AI require different perspectives. So it is really a multi-faculty effort that brings together different perspectives to try and solve our everyday and hopefully our future problems using AI. The Institute aims to also highlight and communicate many of the achievements and advancements that will be conducted at Concordia University, and really serve as a touch point for the community with Concordia University. Without further ado, I want to say and share my excitement for having Rich Howe here, a person who has applied AI and who has very unique knowledge on the topic, and also Tristan Glatard. So I will turn it over to Tristan. Thank you.
Thank you, Emad, and it's a real pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Richard. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So, shall we get started?
Absolument.
Okay. Maybe as a first question, you could let us know a little bit how you became an entrepreneur, and eventually how you ended up leading a successful AI business.
Yes, I'm not sure any of us, or at least most of us, probably don't start out our careers thinking we're going to be an entrepreneur. If we knew better at the time, we probably wouldn't, because it's a lot harder than people believe, but rewarding. I'd say my passion for being an entrepreneur, started like most. For me, it really was Concordia, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the phone here, with the group. Concordia was the place where my passion for engineering, math, and computer science was born. Before Concordia, I'm not sure I had that passion, but certainly, through the 4 years that I was there doing my undergraduate degree, I developed an extreme passion. So that was sort of a milestone for me, a really important milestone. I went on to do graduate studies down the road at that other university. The second milestone, I would say, that sort of led me towards a career, an entrepreneur-based career, was actually a startup in Vancouver. I was part of an early startup that was building an internet product. And this is the early 90s, before, the internet, if you will. In fact, the browser of choice at the time was a browser called Mosaic, and Netscape was just starting. And it was a fantastic company. Now, it failed. So I guess, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I went through a failure, if you will. In our case, that failure was as much about being too early with a product, which has taught me also some very important lessons about having something that is ahead of the market, and then trying to figure out how to commercialize it before that market's ready for that product, and not having the capital to sustain yourself, until the market catches up with you, which is ultimately the problem that we had. But as tends to do, that failure, if you will, opened another door for me, which really was the door that opened AI for me. I was recruited by a company in California. We're talking about the late 90s now. It was a great time to be in California. The internet and capital was flowing, and companies were starting left, right, and center. And there was a really fantastic company called Agency Software that really was at the forefront of AI and machine learning technology. They were really the first company to commercialize the use of neural nets for the solving of a problem. And the problem we solved was credit card fraud. And we managed to solve that problem quite successfully, and the company became, incredibly successful. So anybody who gets that call from the bank saying, "Was that you that made that transaction?" you can thank us, because it's very likely it's our technology that was the cause of the call to begin with. But that was really the genesis of the AI passion, if you will, because I could see it quite clearly that that this was a technology that was just starting. I went on to start my own company after that I then sold, and it was an analytics company. Went on to some executive positions at other really well-known analytics company like Fair Isaac, who invented the credit score, and a company called Axiom, which really was a pioneer in information for consumers. So think about consumer information for marketing. This company, Axiom, multi-billion-dollar company we built, was the pioneer for that. And it's kind of the backbone for Inuvo. So if we get to Inuvo and how I became, the leader of this company, and how our focus was entirely around AI, it really was us looking at this company, Axiom, and saying, could we recreate this business for the 21st century? Sort of fun fact for our French-Canadian friends, Inuvo actually is two words. It's the English word innovate and the French word nouveau. So it's new innovation. Us Concordia alumni, we carry our heritage, with us wherever we go. And in my case, I made it part of the name for the company. If I could leave you just to close out the question, maybe Tristan, there's a lot of things you learn, when you've been an entrepreneur. And I would say, the things that are probably most important to consider if you want to consider to being an entrepreneur, that are often the things you don't think enough about when you become an entrepreneur, are things like sales skills. If you're going to lead a company and start a company, you're going to have to convince people, people who are going to give you money, people who are going to give you business. Your employees want to see passion out of you. This sales skill is exceptionally important, and we often forget it, particularly those of us who are educated in engineering, computer science. We tend to be a little, nerdy. So, I would say expand your horizons in that area. And then discipline. Now, we tend to have it already, but let me tell you, starting businesses is going to be hard, and it's going to put you through trials, and you're going to wake up some days thinking the end is tomorrow. And the only thing that's going to get you through that to motivate you is discipline. So there's a kind of a snapshot of my life as an entrepreneur so far.
Thanks a lot. That's very insightful. There would be a lot of follow-up questions, I guess, but let's move on a little bit with more, let's say, technical parts. First of all, to start with data, we talk a lot about data, and of course that's the primary resources behind AI. Some people say data is the new natural resource or the new oil. Could you tell us a little bit about what data Inuvo uses, where you get it from, how it's collected, what are the costs associated with that? How you manage your data.
You bet. I think if we're going to answer this question, it probably requires that we understand our core offering a little bit, because there has to be a context maybe for the answers. But our core product is a product called the intent key. The name is telling you what it is, the key to the intent of the consumer. Our objective when we built the machine that solves this problem was really to reinvent and reimagine how information is used to help brands find audiences online. In large part, we could foresee that the world was moving towards a greater sensitivity to the use of data, from third parties. There were privacy concerns. And so, we had learned a lot when we built the multi-billion-dollar business called Axiom, who was using a lot of that private data. And we thought, hey, is there a way to reinvent this business model and use AI to do it? Maybe a good way to think about it is, the vision when we first developed the product was, could we determine without any data what the intent of the consumer is, in much the same way Google knows your intent because you conducted a search. But we wanted to figure that out without having to ask the consumer to do a search, right? That was sort of a thesis, if you will, a vision for us. And we started trying to figure out how to do that. And the first thing we needed to do was build a machine. And where we started with our artificial intelligence was understanding the language. You know, the core of our technology is really language recognition. And so we had to build a machine to understand the language. And the model we used for that was the brain. You know, so, you know, one pretty good interpretation of how our brains work is to consider your brain as a library, and the neurons in your brain, which are all connected, you know, one to another, as sort of the books in a library. And the way our brains sort of make decisions and decide things is they very, you know, well collect information from those neurons and put them together to make a decision. We copied, if you will, that model, but we did it with the English language. We picked out, you know, concepts within the English language that we thought were important. We did this analytically. We ended up with 24, 25 million of these sort of concepts that are important to the English language. Concepts could be people, places, things, phrases. I love you, for example, you know, is a concept, if you will, in what we call our concept graph. But we sort of replicated the model of the brain by saying each neuron is a concept. And all those concepts are interrelated to one another. And what we were trying to figure out how to do was, could we figure out what the probability is that each of these concepts are, you know, related to one another? What is the probability, for example, that if yoga is present somewhere, either somebody says it or it's on a page, that it's related to India or holistic medicine or fitness or health, because there are a plethora of possible connections associated, if you will, with a simple term like yoga. And the good news is we figured that problem out. And I think if you think about the magnitude of that problem with 25 or so million different concepts and all of these probabilities, you know, between the concepts, you start to get a sense for the scale, if you will, of the application we were trying to build. And originally, the source of our data to sort of, you know, build those analytics, to determine those probabilities, was really the internet, right? So the concept was pretty simple. I mean, the human mind understands things in concept, in context, excuse me, right? So example, again, going back to yoga. If I tell you yoga, you already have in your mind, you've already formulated what you think that is, but it's only because you've consumed content, you know? So when I say yoga and fitness, it has a different meaning than yoga and health. So we thought, if we just built a machine to interpret all the content of the internet, we used 5 billion, by the way, pages on the internet to do this, and started to look at how often we see various concepts in proximity to others across those 5 billion concepts. We use that to develop the co-occurring probabilities. And then we ended up with this map. Effectively, you know, we call it a concept graph, right? That essentially establishes the probabilities. Now, how we use that is, you know, when an anonymous consumer, you know, lands on a page without any other data, okay? And no data at all. The intent key, this AI engine, has this ability to not just tell you what's on that page, but to tell you what the real intent of the consumer was, because it knows that all of the various associations with the concept and the probabilities of them. Maybe said a different way, you could be on a page about yoga and the page is about yoga workout, but really there's a high probability actually you wanted to be on that page because you were interested in yoga posing. And there may be nothing about yoga posing on that page, right? But our AI engine, you know, has the ability to do that. And so that's kind of the genesis, if you will, of our project. Maybe the storing of data was something you also asked, Tristan, so I'll just keep going here a little bit. But doing, you know, the kind of work that we do at the scale we're doing is, you know, by its definition, big data. You know, we process 100 billion transactions a day. And it's a staggering number, right? It's just literally a staggering number. For other people maybe to bring it down to something simple, it's like 500,000, you know, transactions a second, right? It's mind-boggling. And to do that, you know, you have to also understand, you know, information technology, right? And in our case, we use an array of, Dell hardware. We use, technologies like Hadoop and Spark for the heavy lifting. And the cost, I think that you asked me about the cost of storing, this data is like, $70,000, a month, right? And for those on the phone who said, why don't they use a cloud? We tried, it didn't work. It was too expensive. So we built our own data centers. It was the only way we could do it.
Thanks, Richard. That's absolutely fascinating. I would have a lot of, technical questions at different levels to ask, regarding NLP and how do you represent this data and how about your infrastructure. But I would like to pick up actually on you were mentioning privacy at the beginning of your answer, and saying that privacy was important and is important in your product. What do you think are the challenges associated with that? I mean, we hear a lot of things about privacy. Some people say that we live in a post-privacy society, so it's over. We shouldn't even worry about privacy. Other people are maybe a bit more frightened when you tell me that you can, predict my intent when I arrive on a website. I'm not sure I want you to predict everything everything I think about that. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it like a lot of issues, privacy being one of them, they're more complicated than you might think. So look, I like, with any sort of conflict, I like to think, who are the parties involved, in the debate? Who has a dog in the hunt, if you will, right? And it's not just one. The consumer is one party, to the internet. There's two other parties. One is advertisers who are, trying to promote their products, and the other ones are, websites who are, selling, spots, media spots, and trying to make money from it. It's important to recognize that the only person spending money in that triad is the advertiser. And so I think, we all probably realize that, the internet as a whole is subsidized by advertisers. So you got to think about, look, if you take away all of the abilities for an advertiser to find their audience, okay, identify their audience, put privacy aside, because, nobody wants to use, consumer information. Nobody should do it. Inuvo, by the way, doesn't use any third-party data. So we built it, with that, and everybody's anonymous in our AI. We don't know who you are, Tristan, for example, in our model. We never know who you are, right? You're just a machine, a tablet, a desktop. We don't know who you are. We don't want to know who you are. We could never figure out who you are. We designed it that way on purpose. But, look, think about this. If you have a product, let's just say for a second, you're not a consumer. You're someone who's selling a product, saying it's dog collars, okay? Would you spend money to market your product if you had no idea, who you're sending that offer to, and you had to do it randomly? The answer is no. It's never going to work, and your business is going to fail, right, effectively, because you can't find just that right audience, which in this case would be, say dog owners, right? And you just want to put it in front of them. Otherwise you waste your money, right? So I think there's a really important balancing act here. And look, there's a lot of really good things going on as it relates to the consumer. So if we think about the consumer right now, there are all kinds of privacy legislations that are being proposed. For example, the use of third-party data is going away. I personally think the browser manufacturers are going to lead this charge. So I'm talking Google Chrome, Safari, Microsoft's browser, and Firefox, I guess the four big ones. They are making changes. And in fact, Google announced, I think 6 months ago now, that they were going to completely do away with cookies and with the use of third-party data. And so I think those are steps in the right direction. Good news for Inuvo, we designed our product with that in mind, and we don't need any of that.
That's pretty unique, right? I mean,
very unique.
Design, yeah.
Very unique. Which for us is a competitive advantage, I guess, when and if that occurs. I might add one more thing, and it's probably important because a lot of consumers don't know this. And again, I'm an individual who's been around, big data and big data companies who have, been, the responsible for a lot of consumer information over the years. It's almost never the large companies that are the ones that are like the enemy, if you will. They all have privacy standards and chief privacy officers, and they know the rules, they know the regulations, they know they shouldn't violate, consumers, rights. It's really that 1%, it's the bad people. And they're out there, the hackers, the ones trying to steal your data. And they are out there. Don't kid yourself. They are for sure out there. These are the ones that I think make people scared. And legitimately, they make people scared because they're on the hunt for your information. So, my message usually to people is be vigilant, be careful, right? Don't get caught, by phishing and malware and stuff that people are throwing out there to try to steal your information.
Thanks. Keeping along, with maybe like misconceptions that people may have about AI or different, preconceptions at least. What would you say are some of the major misconceptions about AI in society?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Personally, I find myself more concerned about the growing dependency we all have on these devices more than I do on whether or not AI is going to turn into the fear that I think a lot of consumers think, which is, the Terminator Skynet, the machines are going to, rally together, figure out what's going on, and suddenly, we're all in jeopardy. I don't really see that necessarily occurring. I suppose it's plausible that it could occur, but the current science is nowhere near close enough to be able to do that. Neuroscience itself, still hasn't figured out how we humans are conscious, right? They haven't figured out free will, right? How on earth are we supposed to program those kind of things into computers if we ourselves don't understand them yet? So I think to some degree, I think the general fear of these technologies is perhaps misplaced, because people read about it and they go directly to the Terminator movies and think, oh my goodness, this is going to take over, all of our lives, and I need to run for the hills. So I Tristan, I don't see it, at least not right now. I'm more, excited about all the ways AI can help humans, right? In so many different ways, not just the way that we've commercialized it. There's a plethora of work being done across, multiple industries these days, to try to, leverage the use of AI. So yeah, I'd say dependency on tech worries me more than AI does, right?
Interesting. Thanks for this insightful answer. Coming back a bit to engineering, could you maybe elaborate a bit on the what's a typical life cycle of a product? You talked about your main product in 10Key, but in general, how do you develop AI projects? What are the important pieces there?
Yes, our project was fairly extensive, and I don't know that it's representative of, let's say the smaller AI or analytical projects, some of which I've been a part of. As an overall construct, generally AI or analytic projects, maybe the 80-20 rule applies, in the sense that 80% of the work is the data work, cleaning the data, making sure the data is good, making sure the answers you're getting from the data are right, making sure your predictions make sense, cutting out bad data, trying to find better data. That work is hard work, and it's heavy lifting. It's yeoman's work, if you will. 20% of it is probably the software work and commercializing it once you've got something in place. In our case, maybe the model was a little bit different. There was at least 2 or 3 years of work before we ever started at a lab. Maybe I should back up. The technology that is at the core of what we did actually started in a machine learning lab at UCLA, a research lab, like a lot of good tech does. It starts in research. Somebody has an idea. Somebody's got some students. They want to publish some papers, and they start trying to work on this stuff.
Sounds familiar.
Yes, I'm sure that resonates with you. We were fortunate enough if you will, to capitalize on that and acquire, the sort of the early research associated with that. Now, we spent another 2 years commercializing that, that technology, because it wasn't really tuned to solve the use case that we had. But the lion's share of that early work was, to some degree, what I referenced earlier. It was, hey, the brain learns by consuming content. If we build a machine to go out and try and understand the internet content, maybe we can build this, what we call concept map, right? That identifies all of these individual concepts in the English language. And maybe I didn't say this earlier, so I wasn't clear about it, but, and for those in the audience who, are interested in this stuff, it really was about developing what are called co-occurring probabilities. So if we go back to the yoga example I used earlier, it's not just what's the probability that when yoga is present, there's a chance it's about holistic medicine, let's just say. And let's just say the probability of that is 30%, right? It's also the opposite. It's what is the probability that when there's an interest in holistic medicine, it's about yoga, right? And so, much of our early research and the research that was done at UCLA was focused around could all of those co-occurring probabilities for the entire English lexicon and its phrases somehow be mapped out. And it took 5 billion pages and trillions of possible links, Tristan, and much work, including, by the way, building web crawling technology to go get the data, if you will, from the internet. And of course that was, a Herculean effort, because, that it didn't work and a lot of sites were broken and the data, looked crappy. And, as it always is with large scale, big data projects, right? Absolutely. But ultimately, it actually, ended up working, and I would submit it works incredibly well, right? So, it's amazing. And maybe just for the audience to draw an extension to it, it's not unlike the way the current, what I think are maybe some of the best uses of AI, which is the Siris and the Alexas and the Google Homes. What are these technologies ultimately trying to do? You ask Siri a question, or you say something to Siri, and she tries to determine what your intent is. What is it you're really interested in? That's AI, right? It's parsing that and figuring out what it is that might really be behind, the phrase that you're asking. And by the way, we're humans. We don't always ask the phrase we're intending to ask, right? We don't ask it specifically, right? So the key is trying to figure out exactly what it is you want when you don't get all the information necessary to do so. And that's ultimately what we were trying to do, and we accomplished doing. So, yeah.
Thank you, Richard. That's absolutely fascinating. Wonderful experience and testimony. Maybe it's time to start opening to some questions from the audience. And for that, I'll ask Nida to help out with it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tristan. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. And we'll also be taking questions from the chat box. I see some of them have come in already. So please do submit your questions if you haven't already, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So to start with, let me just pull this up here. So we had an interesting question come in from Mario. He says, you've been when AI was not the buzzword that it is now. Were you already thinking about AI type concepts back then?
Absolutely. In fact, the company that is Inuvo today was the company I wanted to build back in 2009. I wasn't CEO in the middle for a couple of years, not that it matters, but I did actually join in 2009. And I was just chairman for a couple of years in the middle, but I'm CEO and chairman now. CEO means I'm running the company. Chairman would mean I'm doing the board stuff. But yes, but it took us, like a lot of companies, that I built it, you don't always get where you want to get to right out the go. And so we actually built another application that was a growth driver for the business that in many respects funded what we really wanted to do, which was this project, right? Which we knew would be expensive, which we knew we had to pay for, and which we knew would take years to get to market. So it's a great question. It didn't start with this, but it was always, like, this is what we're going to do. If we ever have some money, right, this is what we're going to do. So yeah, we had a vision to do this, and we finally were able to do it.
Interesting. So I have a question that was submitted in advance from Joseph. So various types of biases, so for example, gender and race, have been identified in AI systems, mostly due to biases in the data used to create them. Is this an issue that Inuvo faces? And if so, how do you deal with it?
It's not presented itself in the client work that we've done ever as a bias. And again, because we've sort of reinvented the if you will, the way audiences are developed, you got to keep in mind, we don't have any third-party data coming in. Most of the time, by the way, consumer data that gets used online for marketing, is the result of a number of different data sources. It could be, public record data, your home data, your driver's license data, anything that's public is available. And then all the other, data that gets purchased by people when they try to use that information to market. We don't use any of that. I'd say in our case, I guess the only way the concept graph, which is the brain, if you will, behind what we do, could go wrong is if somehow in that graph, the probability of co-occurring related to some of those issues are incorrect. But I will say it has never presented itself as a problem in the clients that we've done business with, at least not yet.
There's a question from Richard in the audience. I work in the financial industry, and one of the issues that we have is that from a regulatory point of view, AI is a black box and hard to prove to regulators. Does our speaker have any insight into this problem?
Yeah, that's a real problem, especially in financials. I believe it's the OCC in financial services that's the oversight group for everything that happens, and they're tough. I have a background a little bit in financial services from working at companies like Fair Isaac and HNC. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. First of all, the concepts themselves, excuse the pun because that's what we use, but they're already pretty complicated. So trying to, I guess, boil that down into how things work to satisfy a regulator in financial services is going to be difficult. Not impossible, but going to be difficult. I guess to some degree, the best example I could have of people who have done that in the past and done it successfully was us at Fair Isaac. So if, just to remind people, Fair Isaac, invented the credit score, all right, which is basically universally changed the way lending happens in North America. And what data does it use for that? Well, it uses all of the lending data that you've ever had, any mortgages or car loans, etc. And so, we at the time were highly regulated, the banks who were using that technology, and they managed to, convince the regulators because that is the gold standard. Everybody uses the FICO score now, when they're doing underwriting for lending. So it can happen, but no, it is not easy.
Great. So I see there's a couple of questions with a similar theme here. So I'm going to mix Taiwo and Min's question. So you talked a little bit about the misconceptions, right? And you had mentioned this idea of the Terminator being created. Another commonly thought theory is that AI means job losses, right? Because machines would be able to do things that humans can do more effectively and efficiently. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also maybe talk about how you see the job market changing with AI?
Yeah. So that is a good question as well. And I guess it sort of plays to the societal changes that are occurring. I do think that there's a subset of the general population that's going to struggle, but I'm not sure AI is the culprit. I think the world as a whole is getting more technologically advanced. Maybe said a different way, it's getting harder. You need to get smarter. You know, it's almost like if you look around now, you know, in technology circles, which is, you know, where, you know, a lot of the largest companies in the world are now, you know, the bar has risen. I mean, you know, everybody's got master's degrees and PhDs, and so that's not, you know, not everybody can do that. And so I think the societal challenge is, you know, what happens, you know, to, you know, a subset of the population when, you know, when the bar just keeps rising so high that you know, that not everybody can meet the bar. On the flip side, you know, there's new opportunities like AI. I mean, AI is a relatively new field, you know, even though analytics has been around for a long time, but I mean, you just seen it explode. Look at Concordia is considering an AI curriculum. Every university on the planet is considering, you know, some form of analytics or, you know, infrastructure, information technology, and there's plenty of jobs, you know, available. You can't find them. We can't find them, right? Good people for this. So I guess you close one door, you open another door. But there is a challenge that I will let the sociology experts try to figure out with regard to, you know, the subset of the population who, you know, kind of, you know, hopefully won't get left behind, but could get left behind.
As a follow-up question, there's a question from Donna Howe. Hi, Rich. Where do you see AI impacting the educational field in a classroom setting? I'm a teacher working for the Riverside School Board.
Hey, Donna, that's my sister, by the way.
I was wondering.
You know, education's an interesting area for AI. There's a couple of actually ways that I personally have some passion around AI beyond what I do at Inuvo, but life sciences, I'll get to Donna's question here in a second, but life sciences, I think is, you know, an incredible place for artificial intelligence. If you think about all the imaging that occurs, you know, in the life sciences area, you know, this stuff was made to order for some form of intelligence that will, in my mind, easily be better at predicting, you know, possible illnesses than any practitioner will. Simply because it can crunch through, you know, a million prior examples, if you will. And I think it's a huge aid for doctors if they embrace the technology. For education, there's also some interesting applications that I think might be pretty cool that I've heard of. You know, one of them that I thought was really interesting was the use of image recognition software. So I think we know that that technology has advanced tremendously in the last, 4 or 5 years. And if you think about being a teacher, you know, you're at the front of the class, you're doing everything you can to try to, you know, educate your students. Sometimes you're not sure. Are they getting it? Are they not getting it? Are some of them getting it? Are some of them not getting it? Imagine, and I actually think this technology exists today if they could implement it. You could have cameras in the room and they're watching the faces of your students and you would know instantly, like, you know, like when they're confused, you know, the face looks confused, right? And it's like, oh, hang on. Imagine, you know, the teacher's got a desktop and it says, hey, 80% of the class looks confused, right? Oh, okay, let's go back and do that again, right? Let's get to the basis of the understanding. I mean, these kinds of tools, they're just incredible. I think another one in education that might really be interesting, and I think Microsoft is already doing this, I'm not sure, but you know, given the world is becoming more multicultural, and of course, education is coming online. COVID is making everybody go back to school now online. So the world is not just English or French or pick your language of choice, we're everything. You know, I think they have technology now where a teacher can speak, for example, in English and automatically have closed captioning in any language they want for people. I think that's super cool, right? And of course, that's to some degree, you know, AI. So many applications, so much cool stuff going on.
We have a question from Sean who asks, do AI-induced programs or functions rely on individual user data for information, or does it learn about the functions and concepts without needing any user information?
Yeah, so that's related to our product. So again, we require no user information, no data. All we know is that an anonymous consumer happens to be on a page, right? And the brain says, hey, it's likely that this person's interested in yoga fitness, right? And that's what our tech does. It says that's probably what they're interested in, right? Much like a Google search, like I said, but without having to have a Google search, right? One of the interesting things about the internet that a lot of people don't realize is, look, the most powerful company, one of the most powerful companies on the planet is Google. We all know it. Why are they powerful, right? It's not because they're a tech company. It's the data that they have. That's what made Google the powerhouse that they are. It's because billions of times every day, everybody's saying, hey, I want a Prius. And I just told you I wanted a Prius, right? And so what do you think they're doing with that? They're putting, Toyota ads in front of you, or anybody else who's trying to sell a non-gas powered vehicle in front of you. So we were, we don't need any data other than, anonymous consumer who landed on a page and the AI engine just reads the page and says, oh, probably interested in a Prius.
There's a few questions related to how to get into AI. Sanjeev is asking, how important are certifications in AI for getting a job? I could complement that, maybe there are Concordia students attending, and like, what are the important skills of a data scientist or AI specialist, according to you?
Yeah, so this is also a pretty good question. We ideally, okay, and this is not easy to find, but when we're looking for a data scientist, maybe the word data scientist is a misnomer in a way. The best coworker for us in this area is someone who understands data, right? Has worked with data, understands. I hate to use the word math, but it ends up being math. You better be good at math, right? In large parts, statistical math, if you've had some, statistical background. So data and data analysis, exceptionally important, but equally important, how the data is stored, what the boxes like, the efficiency of it, especially if it's big data, right? Because you'll never be able to do it efficiently if you can't. And then the third one, which is the capper, if you've got a knowledge of infrastructure and hardware tech, you got data knowledge and math skills, and then you can write code, okay? Then you got a perfect package all in one person that is the most efficient. Our best data scientists know how to code because they build the models and they write the code themselves for it. And then we go right into production. As opposed to if you've got two skill sets, you got to have one person building the models and they hand it off to someone. And there's always, some tension, if you will, between the handoff and it's not efficient and you got to go tell somebody else about it. So yeah, those three, skills. And I think, what I'm seeing, Tristan, you probably know this better than I do because, you're a faculty member, but, I'm seeing the university start to incorporate those three aspects into a curriculum. So, clearly the schools are ahead of the curve here and they recognize that industry, would love to have, students coming out of college who kind of have general knowledge of the three areas.
Right. And a question that we have from EH, who is asking for your thoughts, and I know you've mentioned some of these, but just any additional thoughts on interesting AI applications in emerging markets?
I think I mentioned the ones that I love, the most. So, I'll say it again. I personally have a passion in the life sciences. My second passion beyond engineering and computer science and data science and AI is actually, biology, believe it or not. Right. So, think about our bodies and the trillions of cells we have, and imagine if somehow, artificial intelligence can be used to identify what's going on with those cells, which is still a mystery, right, in large part. Could that lead to, longevity, longer lives and healthier lives and better lives? And I think the answer is yes, right? So, I think the health sciences, the life sciences are my own, particular passion. And, maybe when I'm done with Inuvo, I'm going to go start a life sciences tech company with AI, maybe.
Great. And I think we'll ask one more question. Do you have any sort of final words of advice for, we mentioned how, you know, we have students and we have a lot of young alumni who are on this webinar, who are trying to enter the job market in such an uncertain time. So any sort of last words of advice for them?
Well, you're doing the right thing now. You're going to school. You know, and so, you know, I'm not the only employer, but for me, you know, a college degree still is the ante. Now, it's not necessarily the thing when I look at candidates that is the be all end all. So I'm not sure I focus too much on the particular curriculums. I'm more interested in a rounded person, you know, and by the way, someone who's passionate and confident. So maybe, you know, so yeah, maybe the word is confidence. You know, when you come out of school and you're looking for a job, you don't know how to behave. You're not quite sure what to do. It's a little scary. You know, the more confident you are when you engage with whoever it is that you're looking to get a job with, I can tell you it's going to be a difference maker, because most younger folks lack that confidence, and it hurts them in interviews. So I don't know, be confident, right? You just graduated, celebrate. You did something great, you know?
Great words of advice. Thank you so much, Rich, and also Tristan, for your fascinating and engaging discussion. Thank you both again for sharing your insight and vision on the important role of applied AI in today's rapidly changing world. Rich, you're an outstanding speaker for us and are a great Concordia ambassador. I can see your Concordia degree there behind you on the shelf. Nice to see that. I also want to say thank you to Emad for your presentation on Concordia's proposed Applied AI Institute. I'm sure that we'll all be hearing more about that in the coming months. So that's all the time that we have for this evening. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. While Homecoming 2020 has flown by, we still have one final event. You're all invited to our Homecoming 2020 virtual dance party tomorrow evening. The party will be led by alum DJ David Rawalia, who will play some great music that's sure to get you dancing. So I hope that we'll have a lot of engineers and computer scientists, you know, representing themselves on the dance floor at your at-home dance floor. And Rich, you're invited to the dance party as well. I hope you'll join. For those of you who haven't yet registered, this is a reminder that Concordia's first ever virtual shuffle is kicking off this Friday, September 18th. Shuffle is the university's annual walkathon to raise funds for student scholarships, bursaries, and services. It's a great cause, and with the financial uncertainty brought by this pandemic, students need our support more than ever. So for more information and to register, you can visit concordia.ca/shuffle. So thank you all for joining us and helping to make Homecoming 2020 a great success. We hope to see you all again very, very soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great night, and goodbye.